When I was around 10 or 11 years old, I was up at my grandparents' campsite in the Andrax for a weekend. I shared a room with my younger brother, and I woke up this one morning and just happened to look out the bedroom window right behind the headrest. The campsite was located right on the edge of the woods. It was pretty much up a trail that led to the edge of the deepest part of the woods, less inhabited by people, and probably 100 to 200 feet away were a group of turkeys wandering around the forest floor. I grew up going hunting with my father, so I knew what turkeys looked like in the woods and what their size roughly was. However, right next to the turkeys, standing on a fallen tree, was what looked like a mix of a hawk and a turkey, but with a humanoid shape. It was probably about 6 to 8 feet tall and looked to have a massive wingspan. Obviously, all of my size estimates are based on the preteen me, however, it was right next to the turkeys, and I was very familiar with the size of the turkeys. This was just much larger and semi-humanoid. I never told anyone about it, kind of just woke up and went to eat breakfast a little too stunned to process what I had just seen. And I was definitely fully awake as I watched it for a few minutes. It might have been an owl or some kind of bird, but this thing was just too big. When I was about 14 years old, I went into the woods as a dare because my cousins knew that I was indeed terrified of the woods. I walked for about 30 minutes before realizing that something was really wrong. I looked all around me trying to figure out what this wrong feeling was when I finally realized what it was. The entirety of the woods were completely dead quiet. I've read somewhere that prey only go quiet when there are predators around. This didn't do much to settle my nerves. The second thing I noticed was that it was nighttime. This shook me because when I set off, it was sunset. Needless to say, I practically sprinted through the woods to get back to the cabin. When I returned, there was a cop car outside of the cabin. It was 8 o'clock. What I thought had been 30 minutes turned out to be 4 hours. I have heard that there are some beings, like pixies or something, that can alter time, but still, I have no idea how I lost 4 hours. So this one night, when I was in college, I went for a de-stressing drive by the nearby lake. I'd circled around and was driving through the woods below the spillway, and I was crossing over a small bridge when, all of a sudden, I saw this just thing cross the road. It looked like your stereotypical Bigfoot, actually. It was probably three-fourths of the way across the road when I first saw it, and continued the rest of the way across to my left. As it stepped off the road, it passed behind a road sign, which was up to its mid-chest or shoulders. This unnerved me so much that I went back the next day and got out of the car. I measured the sign, and turns out I would have put this being around 9 feet tall. Anyways, as I continued on, stunned for the rest of that night, I drove a couple hundred feet when I saw a pair of deer just darting across the road, away from where that thing had gone. Maybe they were spooked by it, perhaps. I'm not sure if the two are connected. Needless to say, I got the hell out of there that night. In the deep north of Ontario, I specifically recall seeing the strangest bird I had ever seen. I never found a picture or anything like it ever since, but it was taller than a stretching, moderately sized dog and had a wingspan that of a huge, almost bat-like thing with a long Fisher King type of beak, but it was odd, gray-blue color with bleedy-looking eyes. I'm not sure if it was a bird with mange, if birds can get mange, or some undocumented animal. To this day, I have no idea what this thing was. As a child, I lived in Frankfurt, and I remember that some nights when it was getting late, I would see this black figure fly over everyone's apartments. I don't know for sure what it was, but I certainly remember that it flew silently. You wouldn't even notice it if you didn't look up. It would fly fast, passing over in an instant. If I had to estimate from memory, I'd say it was about the size of a car. I wasn't the only one who saw this thing either. My neighbors even saw it. Parents everywhere as well. No one knew what it was. At the time and still today, I mostly firmly believe it had to be some kind of massive bat or witch, or maybe if the terror bird still exists. So I'm a 24-year-old male living in the Philippines. This is not even my story, but rather my father's. It happened when I was a year old and my mother was pregnant with my younger sister. We lived in a semi-rural area where we had lots of relatives and everyone knew each other back in the neighborhood. My dad was out watering the plants in the backyard when he suddenly noticed a huge black bird just perched on a lower branch in a tree we used to have in the backyard. I know, big deal, right? Except that the bird had unnaturally bloodshot eyes and looked back at my dad like it was thinking. My father was, of course, a little bit unsettled, but he thought nothing more of it as he resumed his work and went inside afterwards. So hours passed and it was well after dark. My dad went out again to do some more chores in the backyard. He had just finished up when he noticed, in the alley between our house and the fence separating us from the neighbors, some small creature shuffling across the puddle of water on the pavement. Now, we had a pet turtle, a red-eared slider, and my dad thought that the turtle somehow got out of its tank and was making its way across the alley. But on closer inspection, he realized that it wasn't any turtle, but, I kid you not, a crab. That's right, a crab. Hundreds and hundreds of miles away from the sea. It was huge, dinner plate sized, and what further unnerved my dad was that this crab had, just like the bird from the earlier morning, bloodshot eyes. The crab stopped to look at my dad with, according to him, the same intense stare that the bird had given him. My father, having had enough, quickly went inside, a bit creeped out at everything that happened that day. The next morning my dad was out speaking with the elders in the neighborhood at what he saw the previous day. They told him it was an asswing. Now, in rural areas in the Philippines, there are stories of asswings, which is the Philippine equivalent to vampires in Western folklore. They are said to be shapeshifters who enjoy feasting on human and animal entrails, but a favorite delicacy of asswings are unborn fetuses. An asswing could crawl atop a roof at night directly above a pregnant woman as she slept, slip its long, prehensile tongue through an opening in the roof, and lap up the fetus like a mosquito would blood. As it happened to be, my mother was indeed pregnant with my sister at that time. One of the old men had claimed that he knew the asswing that paid a visit to our house that night. He told my dad that this particular asswing wasn't trying to eat my sister, but it just liked being around pregnant women, like my mom, because it was intoxicating to all asswings. Doesn't make it less creepy though, and I'm glad that the asswing wasn't one of the malevolent ones. It was an interesting story though. I should pay more visits to my father to hear more stories that he has. About 20 years ago, after I graduated high school, I used to run traps to make extra money in the wintertime. Since I was pregnant with my daughter, any sort of extra income was very necessary. Anyways, my father had always told me about the creek I trapped in as being quite strange. We would always walk the creek to collect arrowheads and look for other Shanwi relics. So he had told me stories about the Shanwi Native American tribe and their history and folklore. It was a very special spot to us, so when I began trapping, my father would tell me to have some respect for the wildlife. Don't litter, kill humanely, and don't kill what doesn't need to be killed, etc. So, knowing all of this, I built up a great deal of appreciation to life, which led up to my career in conservation efforts. The only reason I state these things is to build context as to why I did what I did. About once a week, while walking up the creek, I would hear this whistling, like a human but in random patterns, which would be along with the smell of sulfur and rotten eggs. It was at this point that my dad told me that it was likely Bigfoot or a skunk ape. Sightings had occurred as long as he could remember in this certain area. Then one time I was scanning down the tree line with my binoculars to check to see if I had any coyotes or foxes in my traps to save me the burden of walking down there. I'd seen a fairly medium-sized tree swaying dramatically a little past the tree line, so I headed over there with my 22, hoping to sneak up on whatever was making this tree dance, or any animal that was medium-sized my 22 could kill with a headshot. About three-fourths of the way to the tree line, the swaying stopped, and I didn't see anything, but at least two of whatever it was began whistling and whooping further back in the forest. I continued to head up the creek, and it always stayed somewhat behind me in the distance, but never left. That was fairly interesting. Then, one day, sadly, an oil fracking company purchased most of that land. They still gave me permission to trap, but they owned it. I had a few accidents where the water got so damn nasty it killed just about everything that consumed it. It broke my heart to see beavers, muskrats, and some coons floating down the creek every time I went there. But after they had installed their rigs and cleared some forest, things got a little hostile. One day when I was running traps, almost all of my traps had been ruined, bent, beaten, and broken, and the remaining animals I had caught were either stolen, ripped from their trap with their foot or leg still attached, and I even found a coyote that had been messed up bad. Fur torn, broken lower jaw, and head beaten in. I feel like this was in retaliation to what the oil company had done, and I was being blamed, but something positive came of it. For a few months afterwards, I would go to the store twice a week and buy a variety of apples and pears and a mixture of meat from carcasses I had skinned, put it in a basket, and leave it in the forest, hoping whatever it was would get it before anything else, and hopefully my traps would be kept safe. Sometimes the basket would disappear, but always in 2 days everything was gone. One day, I believe this thing left me a present in return. It was placed next to where I dropped off the basket last time, and there were about 100+ small sticks stacked very neatly with about 20 acorns from a deer antler. It made me feel very happy. I do hope that I did help this creature out in its very sad moment of its life, though it may have been everything but a Bigfoot or a skunk ape, because I never physically seen it or any tracks to the creek bed, but all my occurrences happened in the woods along that creek, so I really don't know. So still to this day, 20 years later, I think of this from time to time, and I don't see any reason people should be afraid of them, whether it be a skunk ape or a Bigfoot. It was a sad moment in these creatures' lives where their environment was just being destroyed by big oil, and I think they really appreciated what I was doing for them. Even if it was an animal I didn't recognize, my efforts did not go unnoticed. Hey guys, it's Gotay here. I want to say thank you so much for listening to this episode. I know that my cryptid creature encounter videos are quite popular, so I might make that a normal trend going forward. But don't worry, I will keep all the other videos coming out, whether it be with law enforcement, whether it be with park rangers, whether it be scuba divers. We will see. Also, I'm planning on getting a newer mic with better quality, so the quality in which I can speak and my audio and everything will definitely improve. So if any of you have any stories you would like me to read out in one of my videos, please feel free to send them via my personal email linked in the description below, and I'll make sure to definitely include them. So thank you all, and I will see you mates in the next episode.